Unlock the power of your mind. This is Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today. The next hour is devoted to learning something more, not just about the world of shoes and ships and sealing wax, but about how, what, and why we believe as we do. A time for the open-minded and a time for those willing to question what they think they know or what they may believe, those willing to be uncertain for an hour. I'm Eldon Taylor, and this is Provocative Enlightenment. All right, you're invited to join our chat room by going to provocativeenlightenment.com/chat. My partner Ravinder is here in the studio and monitoring the chat room now. So, Rav, say hello to everyone, and please give everyone a special invite to your chat room.
Well, hello, everyone, and of course, everyone is welcome to come join the chat room. We have a great group of people, and lots of interesting information gets shared in there, plus the fact we have lots of fun too. So come join us. That's provocativeenlightenment.com/chat.
All right, in today's spotlight, I would like to discuss something I've been working on recently. The idea I could have been an atheist. Think about that for a moment. Every week, we interview some of the brightest and most informed people on our planet, and I consider myself lucky to have such an opportunity. Very often, our guest is a well-qualified scientist and or an expert in their field, and they inform us that the notion of God is but a leftover from a time when folks failed to understand the world they live in. A supernatural story designed to replace an otherwise failure of understanding. We are told that the mind is but an emergent property of the brain, that evolution explains life, that mystical experiences, including things like out-of-body and near-death experiences, are but manifestations of REM sleep or a dying brain, and so forth. We are informed by hard data that free will is largely an illusion, and that so-called past life traumas are explained by epigenetics. Identical twin research demonstrates genetic propensities so powerful that sociobiologists explain behavior as a result of evolution, and thereby often conclude that even parenting matters little, if at all. Genetics determines who we are, what we will believe, like and dislike, and how we will behave. Studies have even identified markers of criminality that predispose a person to criminal behavior. I could go on. Indeed, I have done just that in a new book I'm working on, completing right now, but the point should be clear from this tiny glimpse into the world coming under the grip of our scientific knowledge. We no longer need a God or a supernatural world to explain the nature of life, say many scientists. We are but meat machines materialized from the natural process known as evolution, and therefore only a machination of atoms destined to become some part of something else as atoms. Perhaps our atoms will participate in a million different physical objects one day in the future, or some form of energy, or some other manifestation of the continuum of that which undergirds all of creation. But we, our individual consciousness, is terminal in every sense. Suppose that's true, and I don't, for the record, but for the moment, accepting the premise, what is that supposed to mean? Does it change how we are to behave? Does it alter our goals and ambitions? Does it make us any less human in the higher sense of the word? Does it somehow instantiate an attitude of indifference? I think not. If the only reason I care about other human beings are doing the so-called right thing, living a life of unselfish dignity, doing my best to be a better person, practicing the golden rule, and so forth, is for reward, a life in heaven, then I'm betraying the very reason I should try to be the best person I can be. My incentive should, after all, be above the nature of reward incentive, or what I've done is for selfish reasons alone. As such, I believe that in the big picture, it really doesn't matter. I live my life as though there may be more to everything than the meat machine implies. But if not, I would not change the choice I have made. The famous agnostic Michael Shermer once told me that he lives his life today caring for others in the same way he did when he was a devout Christian. He sees no reason to do less, and neither do I. My thoughts anyway. What are yours, Ravinder?
You know, this whole subject matter has been of interest to me for decades now. I remember when I was in my teens and a friend of mine apologized to me once for something dumb, but he apologized, and then, because at that time I was very much into religion myself, and he was too, and
by that organized religion.
Yes, okay. Yes, I was brought up Sikh, and at that point I was a very devout Sikh. But he apologized and said that in betraying my trust, he had, I don't know, denied his God or whatever, and he had gone off the path. And so he was only apologizing to me because he got a black mark in his view of God's view of him, if that makes any sense to you.
It does.
And, you know, it's like, well, that was not much of an apology, is it? Doesn't mean an awful lot. So I've thought about that ever since. And, you know, the whole idea of altruism, is it possible to be truly altruistic? If you're doing it for your God, then you're not really being good, are you? And I think there is a higher purpose in life. I hear what you were talking about, you know, genetics determining who we are and what we are, and the whole discussion about free will. But for me, my life is about expressing my best self for me, not for anything else. It's just for doing it for me. So.
And that is a continual journey for all of us, and one I think worthy of working on, regardless of our institutional beliefs or our attitudes towards a God or no God. All right. Every week I read some of your letters as our way of involving you while paying respect to the very important role you play in making the show successful. Last week our show featured Mark Wolin, and we discussed his work and book, It Didn't Start With You, How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to End the Cycle. Fred wrote, thanks for the Wolin show. I agree with you. We need to have this discussion as a society. Perhaps then we can learn to better understand each other. Beth wrote, it sounds like parents need to heal their traumas before having kids. I agree with that, Beth. Brian commented, very interesting show, good guest with research, practical experience, and strong delivery. Moving on, Richard wrote, I am here to tell you, I believe totally in the InnerTalk programs. I have either 8 or 9 of them and use them daily. I have seen amazing results from using CDs from the InnerTalk store. Every single night I finish the day by listening to a restful sleep CD, and I sleep wonderfully. If I by some chance forget, I don't. And there are so many to choose from, I love them. Gelly wrote, your InnerTalk CD, Forgiving and Letting Go, was of tremendous help to me and my clients. I had to forgive my mother at age 10, started psychoanalyzing, and became a therapist. Your work is much appreciated. Julia wrote, this is a wonderful example of how well the InnerTalk CDs work. I had a lifelong artistic gift, but as you well know, in our society, artists are not always taken seriously. For years, I not only fought with using this gift, felt totally useless as a person, because it is what I am really good at, and I was not supported in the way of a career. But I also fought with the medium of oil as well as that of clay, mostly due to the way it was taught. I loved high realism in oil as well as historical reproduction in pottery, and both were scoffed at in school. A few years ago, I discovered your InnerTalk CDs. Long story short, over time I completely reprogrammed my subconscious mind, and in so doing, was led to the tools and information that I was missing to take my work to the next level in the way that I wanted to do it. Painting has gone from being an uphill battle to a complete joy, and I am making a living doing that which I love. There are no words to sufficiently thank you, Eldon. Well, Julia, you just did, and your words are more than adequate. We love that, don't we, Ravinder?
We do. I love that. And her work actually is really fabulous. She's a friend of mine on Facebook as well, and I've seen some of her stuff, and it just proves the importance of, how you talk to yourself and what you think and what your beliefs, because it was her previous beliefs that were holding her back, and she's amazing.
Believing in yourself always matters, period, end of quotation. That's, a motto that you should never forget. All right, that's all the time we're going to take for letters today, but we do love your comments, so please keep them coming. You can opine by writing to me at Eldon, that's ELDON, at eldontaylor.com, or by joining me on Facebook at Dr. Eldon Taylor. We do sincerely appreciate your thoughts and ideas. Now to today's show. Finding Purpose in a Godless World, Why We Care Even If the Universe Doesn't, with author Dr. Ralph Lewis. Michael Shermer has this to say about Dr. Lewis's book, Finding Purpose in a Godless World. Quote, like other grand synthesizers and interdisciplinary thinkers, Lewis employs evolutionary theory, complexity theory, cognitive science, neuroscience, psychology, anthropology, and other fields to review the best evidence we have for why consciousness evolved out of primitive brains, where goal-directedness and will come from, and how they drive us to strive for meaning, more meaning than other animals, and where our moral sense comes from and why we care about others, even those not related to us. Close quote. That's a big claim. So let me tell you a little about today's guest. Dr. Lewis is a psychiatrist at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center in Toronto, Canada, an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Toronto, and a psycho-oncology consultant at the Odette Cancer Center in Toronto. Dr. Lewis obtained his medical degree in 1990 at the University of Witwatersrand, South Africa, where he grew up. He completed specialty training in psychiatry at the University of Toronto in 1996, followed by a 2-year fellowship in neuroimaging research and a Master of Science in Neuroscience, both at the University of Toronto. He has held his present staff physician appointment at Sunnybrook since 1998. So on that, let's get him in here. Welcome to Provocative Enlightenment, Dr. Ralph Lewis.
Hello, Eldon. A pleasure to be on your show. Thank you for inviting me.
Your book is a terrific read. I guess this is personal, but I guess I am very interested in all of the arguments that propel us towards understanding our world in a scientific way. And yet I have to tell you, your conclusion is something I really drag my feet at. Maybe I'm a bit inclined to be a student of John Wisdom. It was Wisdom who, after all, the great atheist who said, doesn't it make you feel good? It's kind of like having daddy at the end of the hall when you have a nightmare. Maybe I'm in that camp, that school, I don't know. But we'll try and flesh this all out for our listeners today. However, first,
I think we're all in that camp to some degree. That's human nature.
I think you're right. We like to know 3 things on this show, Dr. Lewis. Who is the messenger? What is the message? And, of course, how do we use it? To that end, what are you passionate about, and what led you to writing this book?
I'm passionate about so many things, but more than anything, I'm passionate about people. That's why I went into medicine, and that's why I specialized in psychiatry. I also love bridging fields and integrating things, synthesizing ideas. When I look back on the trajectory of my career, I think that was why I went into medicine in the first place. I was interested in both the sciences and the humanities, and this, for me, was the best integration. and all the more so when I went into psychiatry. And I think the book is just another one of these endeavors on my part to try to bring together disparate ideas from many different fields.
You heard today's spotlight, Doctor. What have I got wrong?
You got wrong about what, Eldon?
The spotlight about, all of the science that shows us we shouldn't believe and yet we want to believe.
Well, no, I think you're right that there are lots of things that we want to believe. There are lots of things that I want to believe. Science often goes against what we want to believe and goes against our intuitions. A lot of it is counterintuitive. And I guess part of what I've learned and been impressed by in my career is the unreliability of intuition and subjectivity. And, science really is the method that we collectively, humans, have come up with to try to overcome this problem, to bypass our intuitions, our subjectivity, our wishful thinking, to follow the data.
Okay, I want to get a little background here before we get into your book, if that's all right. Were you raised in a religious environment, Doctor? And, just for the record, do you consider yourself to be an atheist or an agnostic?
Well, let me answer that question first. I consider myself to be an atheist. I considered myself to be agnostic for most of my life, and I transitioned from agnostic to atheist something like a decade ago, almost a decade ago. My background, I'm Jewish, and I very much identify as Jewish, and I was raised in a traditional, believing but not terribly religious household. I went to a Hebrew school for most of my primary and secondary schooling. As a matter of fact, we sent our own children to a Hebrew school up until grade 8, and then to public high school, hoping to achieve balance that way. We still observe religious traditions. I'm quite sentimental about religious traditions and about religious and cultural identity, but it's not with any belief. So that may sound paradoxical or contradictory, but I don't think it is. We value cultural heritage, we value tradition, we value wisdom. I think there is lots of wisdom, lots of insight to be gained from religious teaching. I see all of this as a human product, not in any shape or form revealed by some God or inspired by some God.
All right. Now, religious people have criticized you as offering nothing more than a purposeless gesture that is lacking hope. So I want to flesh that out for a minute. Many religious people find great solace in the idea of divine intervention, especially those who suffer greatly. You're a physician, and I've interviewed many physicians on this show that have reported or described seemingly miraculous healings. Hope is a major player in health. As a psychiatrist, I'm sure you're aware of Kurt Richner's classic experiment with drowning rats. Hope alone plays a significant role in life. After, in his words, after the elimination of hopelessness, rats do not die when you try to drown them. Well, that's an exaggeration, but you know the story. if he lifted them out of the water and gave them a reason to hope, when he put them back in, they would swim for hours and hours and hours, as opposed to die in a matter of a few brief minutes. What sort of hope do we have in a godless world? And in your mind, does it matter?
Well, I think you actually put it well in your introduction. It probably doesn't change anything actually about the way that we conduct our lives, the strength of our sense of purpose, our compassion for other human beings, the meaning we derive from things. God is an optional belief. It's from the point of view of an atheist, it's superfluous. It's an extra optional but unnecessary belief because it doesn't change anything, either in terms of our understanding of how the world came about, or in terms of the strength of our sense of purpose. But let me just also clarify that in my clinical work, I'm most certainly not in the business of dispelling people's religious beliefs. And
sure,
I, in fact, will bolster someone's religious belief in the service of helping them to function better and to be happier. And I'm frequently in the position of urging my patients to go back to church, for example, if they've been withdrawing from their community, from their congregation, let's say as a result of depression. Certainly, for many people, it does help them. Or at least they believe that it helps them. But the problem with religious belief is it's a double-edged sword, and so I've dealt, unfortunately, sadly, with many formerly religious people who were devastated by cruel adversity, by what I would certainly see as random adversity, but in their minds, it shouldn't have happened that way. How could God have let this happen? And they feel abandoned by God, and they feel anguished and confused, completely bewildered and disoriented. And it can be a very bitter experience for people who were devout believers when they suffer terribly cruel adversity.
Indeed, a double-edged sword. I like it. So we could basically say, Doctor, that you're a pragmatic atheist, huh? If it works for you.
Fair description. I'll use that. I'll go with that. Thank you, Eldon.
All right, look. I remember as a child kneeling at the edge of my bedside to say my prayers before going to bed each evening. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. The afterlife is important to millions of people. But a godless world suggests there is no such thing. I think that's what most of us don't want to give up. That subtracts so much meaning for a lot of people in their life. I mean, so I guess I'm just going to ask you straight out. Is that belief, that afterlife belief, nothing more than, as Freud put it, a sugar-coated neurotic crutch in your view?
Well, I'm not a Freudian, but yes. Yeah, those wouldn't have been my words, but essentially, yes. From the point of view of an atheist, it's wishful thinking, and it's unnecessary wishful thinking. And so, to your point about the fear of, let's call it nihilism, the fear that in the absence of belief or the loss of belief, belief in a higher power, belief in a higher purpose, belief in an afterlife, the fear that life would then be rendered pointless, purposeless, and meaningless. my book is an attempt at reassuring the reader that is not the case. That is not the inevitable outcome of loss of belief. And I attempt in my book to explain why that is. And if I were to boil it down, it comes down to this, which is that our sense of purpose, and you can add meaning and morality, is not dependent on the universe possessing those properties. The human sense of purpose, meaning, and morality is not derived from the universe having inherent purpose, meaning, and morality. That's an assumption that many people make, but there's no basis for that belief. And so it's, again, an unnecessary, superfluous belief, and our sense of purpose, meaning, and morality will emerge very much robustly intact once we move past the belief that the universe has to have those properties in order for us to have those properties.
And we've got a break coming up, Dr. Lewis. And following the break, I want to drill down into your book. But it seems to me we many of us are trapped between what we'd like the world to be like and perhaps what it is like. I want to get into the science. I want to talk about some of the details of your research. So we're speaking with Dr. Ralph Lewis about his work and book, Finding Purpose in a Godless World, Why We Care Even If the Universe Doesn't. It is a great read. I recommend it highly. It doesn't matter what vent you have, religious, non-religious, atheism, agnosticism, a devout believer. Knowledge about what you believe and why you believe it is discovery about who you are. And if you're not willing to look at who you are, well, then you're missing the whole picture. What possibly might even be the meaning, if there is such a thing. You can learn more about our guest by visiting his website at Purpose Without God. One word, purposewithoutgod.com. Now we have a video for you considering the question, how would our public discourse change in a world without religion? So if you're not already in the chat room, now's the time to get on over there, and you can do that by going to provocativeenlightenment.com/chat. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
Change has never been easier. Whether you wish to lose weight, stop smoking, build better relationships, become creative, enjoy ultra prosperity, or simply relax and promote self-healing, InnerTalk has been repeatedly demonstrated effective in the most rigorous of scientific studies. Our customers love InnerTalk. Sean wrote, I have struggled with bulimia for over 30 years and have never been able to lose weight without restoring to it until I used InnerTalk. Vicky wrote, my hubby has been using the Stop Snoring CD and already his dangerous and raucous snoring levels have stopped. Celeste wrote, I recently graduated from Taft Law School with honors. I'm writing to tell you how much your InnerTalk CD, Excel in Exams, has helped me. With over 300 titles to choose from, there is something for everyone. Check it out today by going to innertalk.com.
Unlock the power of your mind. This is Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
Welcome back. If you just joined us, we're chatting with Dr. Ralph Lewis about his work and book, Finding Purpose in a Godless World, Why We Care Even If the Universe Doesn't. A very compelling read and one I recommend. You can learn more about our guest by visiting his website at purposewithoutgod.com. Okay, every week we ask our guests for their favorite music that has some real meaning to them. Music psychology is a field of research with practical relevance in many areas, including intelligence, creativity, personality, and social behavior. Now, your chosen music doctor is Universal Men by Johnny Clegg and Jaluka. So please tell us, why is this music important to you, and how does it inform us about who you are?
Well, I grew up in South Africa, as my accent betrays. I spent most of my adult life in Canada, but during my high school and medical school years, South Africa was at the height of the anti-apartheid struggle, and in fact, the state of emergency, virtual police state, coincided with almost my entire medical school studies. So the music you played is by a man named Johnny Clegg and his group at the time known as Jaluka. Clegg, who's still singing and recently toured North America despite serious illness, is a progressive South African musician who's actually also got a background in anthropology. He became known as the White Zulu, at least that's what the French called him. He was very taken with Zulu African culture, and he sang in a combination of English and fluent Zulu. He had a huge influence on young white South African liberals during the apartheid struggle. So I thought it was fitting to pay tribute to his music when you asked me for a suggestion.
Interesting lyrics. The lyrics themselves seem to suggest that we're struggling between two worlds. Does that have anything to do with, the theme of your life, particularly the theme of this book?
I imagine it's a theme for many of us, and yes, I suppose I could say the two worlds of my background, childhood and youth in South Africa, and my adult life in Canada, the two worlds of religion and atheism. Just by the way, what the particular song, the English lyrics, which people can listen to if they're interested, had to do with migrant workers, Zulu migrant workers from rural areas living and working in the cities on the gold mines. That's what the two worlds referred to in the song itself. But yes, it's a theme that resonates for many of us, certainly.
Interesting. All right. Michael Shermer, who I have a great deal of respect with, I've had him on the show a couple of times. We've discussed in great detail, the difference between the nature of the subjective value and the objective universe, and agnosticism, atheism, and believing. Michael Shermer seems to think of you as a general systems theorist. What I read, what I see is you're a psychiatrist. What is a psychiatrist doing writing a book on the purpose of a godless world?
Well, Eldon, in my work, I've counseled so many people who've had experiences with illness, both mental illness and physical illness, because I work with cancer patients as well, helping them with their psychological reactions to cancer. But my patients have very often had calamitous life events occur to them, which, as I was saying earlier, for many of them have shattered their religious beliefs if they had been religious before that. And people are constantly struggling to come to terms with the utter arbitrariness, the randomness of adversity, and in this case, illness. The other thing, of course, is as a psychiatrist, I'm very much involved in trying to help people who are suicidal. And I'm sure you're familiar with the famous Albert Camus quote, there is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. But beyond that, there's so much more that psychiatry has taught me, that my patients have taught me, about how people form beliefs. And of course, in psychiatry, we're often dealing with distorted or mistaken beliefs, and sometimes quite often overtly delusional beliefs, but also just more subtly distorted beliefs as are present in people with depression and anxiety. And so I started thinking much more deeply about how people form beliefs. And what I realized also is that human nature is writ large in mental illness, because the cognitive distortions that you and I have, and I certainly have many, just like any other person, these are amplified or magnified, sometimes to extreme and even absurd degrees in mental illness. And they're very illuminating when because they reveal the processes of cognitive distortion in healthy people with what we would regard as normal thought process. So there are many, many reasons why I'm interested in this. I guess also you could say that the job of a psychiatrist is to help people to be skeptical about their own beliefs. So psychiatry and skepticism, in fact, merge quite well.
You open your book with a story about your wife Karen's life-threatening cancer and its impact on you. How did that experience shape your worldview?
Yes. So, as you and I were discussing earlier, I was agnostic and certainly quite partial to religious beliefs, and quite admiring and respectful of religious wisdom. And while I certainly was not a literal biblical believer, I never was, and I was certainly skeptical about divine revelation of scriptures and parochial views of religion that hold that the higher power, whatever that may be, came down to this planet and to our tribe and delivered this book, dictated this book to us. So that always got me very skeptical. But I was very partial to the vague belief that there is some kind of higher power and some kind of higher purpose, and that at some level life and the universe may be mysteriously directed, cosmically directed towards some end. And so when Karen was diagnosed with cancer, first of all, of course, we were dealing with this in a much more mundane day-to-day manner, not these lofty philosophical ideas. It was shocking. It was highly stressful. It was really a very, very difficult time. I won't go into that now, but you can imagine it was all those things you would imagine it to be. And we had 3 young children, and she was quite young. But after the initial devastating news, we had some extraordinary good news in the diagnostic and treatment process. For a while, it seemed like almost as though things were happening serendipitously and fortuitously, and it almost felt like we were being guided toward a favorable outcome. Unfortunately, that was dispelled several times by more bad news, but ultimately the news is good, and Karen is alive and well, suffering a few complications from treatment, but very much a survivor of that cancer. But I realized in retrospect that I'd been suffering from this illusion that I think so many of us have, almost all of us have at some time in our lives, that things happen for a reason, things are meant to be, that coincidences are somehow guided. I was skeptical of that too, because having worked in medicine and in psychiatry, I was very familiar with denial, and I'd seen how this gets deployed by people when they're facing terrible adversity and seemingly arbitrary, random illnesses. So I was skeptical, and yet I still had this eerie, kind of sometimes even spine-tingling feeling. And so I was very curious about that. In the years that followed, I started trying to understand why it is that this feeling of cosmic guidance and everything happening for a reason is so prevalent, and I think it's central to religion. And so I started researching that and trying to understand that better. And of course, Michael Shermer has written extensively about that in his own way, and that's part of what drew me to his writing.
I read your story, and subjectively, there's a part of me that says, well, that's pretty miraculous. That does appear that there was some purpose to this. There was some synchronistic something or other going on, some reason. And I think any reader that does read this story is going to come basically to that kind of conclusion. So I can understand how you got there. Here's where I go, though. Do you think, Doctor, that there's any such thing as a miracle? I mean, do you think all these stories, miraculous recoveries, people that don't show up for a choir and the entire church burns down and they've never been late, all these stories, they have a physical explanation, or do you think there is such a thing as a miracle?
I do not think that there is any such thing as a miracle in any shape or form.
Anthony Flew, Doctor, allegedly regarded as a devout atheist, the most famous of all atheists, changed his mind before he died, and his last book was titled "There Is a God: How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind." Do you think that it's possible to you to ever change your mind?
I certainly do, and I certainly hope that I'm open-minded, and I have changed my mind fundamentally on many things in the past, and I hope that on the larger issues, what has swayed me has been evidence, and I hope that in the future, if I were to change my mind again, I'm sure I will, on fundamental matters, it will be evidence, rigorous evidence, that changes my mind.
I have to ask that question simply because I suppose when I was in college, I was a devout agnostic, if not atheist, and enjoyed debating theistic folks, and I switched. I went the other way, the opposite way you went. So all right. Yeah. I have to ask you then, okay, look, it's obvious that I'm guilty of this. Why do people believe that the universe should or does have some inherent purpose and that things happen for a reason? What's the psychology behind that?
The psychology behind that's actually not very complicated. We ourselves, it goes without saying, are very purposeful, purpose-driven creatures. And we've evolved this way as social animals, and we've evolved as social animals to be extremely adept at detecting other people's intentions, and in fact other animals' intentions, predators and prey. We've had to evolve this ability exquisitely well in order to survive. And the problem is that we overshoot and for reasons that Michael explains well, and I won't reiterate his explanation because I think you've heard it, and your listeners on your show have heard it before. But it has to do with the example that he gives very simply is the rustle in the grass. Is it a predator or is it just the wind? And so we're descended from people who are who, if you like, were more paranoid. Had a greater tendency, were more likely to think that this was an intentional agent threatening them, rather than just saying, "Oh, okay, it's just random." And so we overshoot, and we have a tendency to think that things that are random are actually intentional. So we over-identify patterns, and we over-attribute deliberate intention, or another word for that would be agency, to random events.
Right. All right. We're running short of time, and there's so much more that I want to talk to you, so I'm going to just kind of bulletproof. I'm going to cover some of them in bullets, all right?
Yep.
How did consciousness evolve out of primitive brains?
Well, we don't know the whole answer to that, of course, right? We're just at the beginning of understanding consciousness as a biological medical science. But consciousness is an elaborate outgrowth of, if you want to think of it that way, of more primitive nervous functions that have to do with simply simply enabling an animal to respond to a stimulus. So nobody knows why we have such elaborate consciousness, but there are many things in evolution that are like that just are a function of a runaway process of greater and greater complexity, and have evolved that way almost just because they can. So there's a lot of debate about whether consciousness is really such an asset or is it a liability. But presumably it's got a whole lot to do with the extraordinary success of Homo sapiens relative to other animals. I mean, I think that much is pretty obvious.
I'm reminded of Clifton Fadiman's quote, "And God plagued man with the ability to think."
Yeah.
Free will, Doctor.
Yes. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So I don't think it's possible for there to be such a thing as free will in an absolute sense. In pure principle, from a medical, from a scientific and biological point of view, it's not possible for us to have free will that is truly untethered from all of the determinants. However, our decision-making ability, the human brain's decision-making ability, is so extraordinarily complex that we might as well have free will. We might as well regard ourselves as having free will, because it's probably not even possible in pure principle to ever design a computer, even in the distant future, that could predict the response of a human brain to a particular stimulus. It's just way too complex, quite possibly even in principle, for any computer imaginable to ever predict it. So we might as well have free will. So again, pragmatically, I believe in free will, but in pure theoretical principle, no, I don't.
All right, and we are out of time, and I have got 40 more questions for you. We're going to have to bring you back to the show another time. The book, Finding Purpose in a Godless World by Dr. Ralph Lewis, M.D. Do get a copy of this book. I want to thank you, Dr. Lewis, for your work and for your willingness to share so candidly with us your experiences and your your contribution to understanding the human condition. We've come to the end of another episode of Provocative Enlightenment. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed our show and will join us again next week, same time, same place. Until then, remember, believing in yourself always matters.
Provocative Enlightenment has been brought to you by Progressive Awareness Research and other sponsors. Provocative Enlightenment is a syndicated show and appears on other networks. For a schedule of show times, visit provocativeenlightenment.com. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, write to Eldon at eldontaylor.com.